This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamTrade, a digital solution that helps you hire, optimize, and retain employees. Using psychometric assessments to identify more than 100 professional mindset traits, it gives instant reports you can use to build high-performing teams. Get 2 free profiles today, no commitment, no credit card required, at teamtrait.com. TeamTrait.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
I've never done this topic before, Lee, but I looked up the definition of what an introvert is. Someone who prefers solitude and quiet over large groups and social interaction, more comfortable with their own thoughts and feelings, and drained after socializing.
Yep.
So if you are a leader trying to climb to the C-suite and you're going to manage 10,000 people or whatever, how does that work if you're an introvert?
Well, that's for sure. And the other thing is that, my experience in coaching introverts is that sometimes you can be an introverted extrovert, or and the fact that you prefer to be introverted, but when you're thrust into the situation or on stage or into a networking event or something like that, something clicks and you can go into, extrovert mode and everything like that. But at the end, or whatever, you're freaking exhausted, and it's certainly not something you look forward to. That's been my experience with some of them, certainly not all of them. I kind of view this as on a spectrum, pretty much, going from introvert to extrovert and everything in between. So curious to hear what our guest has to say about that. Yeah.
She agrees with you. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. We are so happy that you are here. My name is Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
This guest is a rock star. She's amazing. Sharissa Sebastian Deppen, the CEO of Leadership Mastery Alliance. Listen to this. Like, she's not busy at all. TEDx speaker and coach, writer for Forbes, the Forbes Coaches Council member. She's also a professor at Southeastern University. She's got more than 10 years of experience. She's coached over 1,000 people and specializes in a lot of things. But this topic really rang my bells because I'm the opposite of an introvert. Empowering introverted servant leaders to achieve their highest aspirations. Sharissa, thank you for coming. Are you an introvert? Is that how you got into this, or what sparked you?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. But yes, to answer your question, I absolutely identify as an introvert. And I love that you opened up with talking about what that is and what that means. And there's so many different definitions and, varieties of how to interpret what an introvert versus an extrovert is. And actually, one of my favorites, you've touched on this in the definition, one of my favorites is that introverts get their energy from being away from people. So it's not that they don't necessarily, they don't necessarily avoid being with others. They like to engage with, in relationships and all of that and be with other people, but it is draining. And so they do need to, get away for a little while, recharge, and then be ready for whatever is next. And extroverts tend to be the opposite for the most part. It's not, it's a general rule. It's not always the case, but generally speaking, extroverts tend to get their energy from being around others, and that fuels them and they enjoy that. But it's not to say that extroverts, I have a husband who's an extrovert, so very different from me.
Oh, wow.
But he also, interestingly enough, we've had many conversations, of course, about this because this is the world that I live in. And he also says to me, sometimes I just need to be away for a little bit and get my energy and he's not always going to choose to be in that environment. It just depends, right, for one person to another. But generally speaking, introverts get their energy from being away from people, and then extroverts like to be around other people, in most circumstances, and that's where they get energized. So it's interesting, fascinating to me.
So how does someone who's an introvert become a podcast host?
Okay. So I love that we're diving right into this topic, and that is such a brilliant question. A lot of people, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people look at me or have conversations with me, and I don't know if it's my energy or what it is, but they're like, I would never have guessed that you're an introvert because I speak and I do podcasts and different things like that. And honestly, I feel like part of that is aligning with your passion and your purpose. Like the thing that fuels me is this purpose and the why behind the work that I do. And so when I choose, and I'm very intentional, and that's another thing that's so important for introverts to do, is to choose, where they spend their time and effort and energy, and align that with their values, align that with purpose, with the things that are important to them. And so that's where I really shine, when I make those intentional decisions about where I spend my time, and when I feel like it's going to have a valuable and impact to the people that I'm going to serve. Then I get energized by that. That's really a part of what energizes me. But of course, as an introvert, there's only so much of that I can do before I need to kind of retreat, gain my energy again, and then come back out. But I do love this. I love having conversations like this. So thank you for the opportunity again.
I want to know what I read in prepping for the show. You said that business celebrates the extroverts. And so what are some of the challenges and the characteristics that introverted leaders experience on their career journeys typically?
Yeah. And this is also another generalization. And interestingly enough, I do find that there is starting to be a shift. The more we start talking about this and recognizing the different personality types in the workplace, the more leaders are starting to embrace this, and their eyes are being open to, oh wait, that there's people in the workplace that are maybe a little bit different, right? So there's introverts, there's extroverts, and it's so important as a leader to be aware of that and to create that environment that's going to support your different types of different types of people. I actually saw a statistic recently. Actually, it was based on several different research studies that were done. And there's around 40% or more of introverted leaders in the corporate space right now. And that blew me away. I was so surprised by that, right? Because a lot of times, it's not that easy to just pinpoint and say, oh, that person's an introvert or that person's an extrovert. But to go back to answer your question, Audrey, one of the things that's so important is that we get to know the people that we're working with, right? Whether that's our teams, our other people in different teams, or even our leaders, to figure out, okay, so how are you wired, right? So what is it how do you function at your best, and how can I then support you in that? Mm-hmm. So with that team's example, if you have people in your team who you think might be introverts, don't assume that, right? So have a conversation, have discussions with them, and talk about it. Talk about, okay, how, what is the best way that you work, right? So how do you process information? What's in a team setting, how can our team best support you in who you are? And also when it comes to appreciation, how do you want to be appreciated? How do you feel valued in the workplace? So when we ask the right questions, and that's why I love this coaching approach, when you ask the right questions, it's a lot easier for you to understand and have that empathy for the people that you work with, but also have an understanding so that you as a leader can make the best possible decision on what's the best way to engage with your introverts and draw them out, rather than just like making assumptions or going based on what you think about your team and things like that. But the characteristics, generally speaking, of introverts tend to be very good with one-on-one relationships. So they're very good listeners. They're going to lean in and listen and pay attention. They take in a lot from their environment. And then they internally process. So they're going to take time to absorb what's coming at them. They're going to, take time to connect the dots in their mind. And they're going to be very intentional usually when they speak. So when they do speak, people tend to pay attention. I always tell my introverted leaders, never underestimate that. When you do have the opportunity to share something, people generally are going to, sit up and take notice and want to hear from you, because they know that when you do speak, it's very well thought out, right? So you're going to have a very intentional approach to when you do offer, whatever it is that you want to share. And then the other thing about introverts, they're also very reflective and they're deep thinkers. So they need that time and space to be able to do that. Introverts tend to be not as great when they put on the spot, right? When they have no way to plan or prepare for a conversation or for a meeting or something like that. So give your introverts as much information ahead of time so they can mentally prepare, and let them know, what's expected of them if you can, so that when they get into those settings, they feel like they have the ability to think through things, to plan and to prepare, because they function best in that kind of setting as well. And that's before, but also after the fact, right? So give them opportunities to take away from whatever conversation, discussion, whatever needs to happen in that space. Give them time to process that so that they can then come back and say, okay, this is what I'm taking away. I've had time to think about it. And so here's my input. Here's what I have to share. So just generally speaking, and then there's also that focus on service, right? So they want to really add value. They want to do that. And so just because they might not be the first people to speak in a room, or if there's a room, say you have a lot of extroverts in your team, just because your introverts are not necessarily going to interject or anything like that, it doesn't mean that they don't have something valuable to share. They're not, disengaged or disconnected from the conversation. Most of the time, they're just taking in, absorbing until they feel like they have the opportunity. But you also have to be mindful to give them that space and opportunity to share, and give them a heads up ahead of time. So that's a long answer to your question, but hopefully that unpacks.
So all of that, great tips.
Yeah, you covered about 3 questions that I had, so that's great. But I still have one, which is like, you coach hundreds of executives, and so what is the number one issue that you encounter when you first start coaching one of these executives?
Oh, that's a big question. The number one issue, let's see. I guess I'll start with the number one thing that they come to me with. Like when I ask them, okay, how can I help you? What top of mind for you? I get a lot of a combination of visibility and executive presence, which is fascinating to me. I'm like, oh, okay.
My question. Yep.
Yes, it's executive presence with the visibility. And it's very interesting because a lot of my introverts specifically will come to me with these 2 things, because that's a lot of the feedback that they get. So they get told things like, oh, you're doing great, keep doing the great work that you're doing. You're extremely valuable to us. We would love to see more of that, right? So more of that executive presence in these meetings, more visibility, speak up more, that kind of thing. And so it's fascinating from a number of different perspectives. One is that, yes, there is some validity to that, of course, but also there's benefit into understanding how introverts can, add value. And just because they might not be the most visible, the most vocal in those types of situations, it doesn't mean that they can't build those really important relationships, that, that leadership can't see what they're doing. There's other ways to go about doing that. But yes, those are the 2, I would say, hot topics that I get a lot, is that executive presence, and then how do I create visibility in a way that feels good to me, right? That aligns with my strengths, rather than me trying to be someone I'm not, like rather than me trying to be that extrovert and the loudest voice in the room. Because introverts, I will tell you, this is one thing that I hear a lot. They're like, I do not want to speak for the sake of speaking. That's not me. And so how do I navigate that when I'm being told that they want to see more of me, more of my executive presence, more visibility from me, and things like that?
So let me ask, from professional development, I guess my question is, if our introverted leaders passed over more often for promotions?
Oh, that's interesting. And honestly, that is a really great question. And I do not have the answer to that question. It's very hard to tell, the reasoning, because we don't have full visibility into the exact reason or the real reason behind, how that happens and why. But it is a very valid question, because introverts, that's a good question for introverts to ask, is, if that is something that they feel might be holding them back, then how do they advocate? And this is a big topic that I talk about in my my coaching practice, is that for introverts to be able to advocate for themselves, because it's not enough to just sit back and go, oh, I'm an introvert, so if I get looked over, oh well, I'm not prepared to be somebody I'm not. But it is going to be up to the individual to advocate for themselves. If they're not getting what they need, if they feel like they're not being supported, or they're not given the opportunities, have the conversations, open up the dialogue, about that, in a way that feels good to them, but in a way that also, is going to help them to be positioned for those promotions and things like that. And to get honest feedback as well about, okay, if there is a specific reason why maybe they are looked over for a promotion, or they've been waiting and it just hasn't happened, then don't be afraid to have a conversation and ask, what is it? Is this something that I need to work on? Are there other factors involved? So ask the right questions of your leadership so that they can, give you the best possible answer. But of course, you do have to be mindful of the fact that some environments are just not going to be the right environment for you. And I've experienced this a few times in my career as well. So I think working with somebody that can help you navigate that, like a coach, right? A coach, oh my goodness, my coaches have completely changed my world, because when I was stuck in those places where I was, being internally critical of myself, they helped me to navigate that, to figure out, like, there were many cases where it was just not the right fit for me. Where I wasn't right. And I was trying to make it work and, trying to do everything I could, but it simply just wasn't the right fit. And so having your support system is also going to be so important, so that you can get different perspectives on, what might be right for you. So there's going to be sometimes when there's certain things that you can do to help you in these situations, to advocate for you. But if you feel like you're still just not getting what you need, and there's certain things that are just not aligned, it might be time to make a switch.
So when you're dealing with your extrovert at home, or where, it's easier for you basically to slip away to another room in a house, take a book with you, or whatever. But it's like when you're dealing with extroverts at work and you've got a full calendar and everything like that, what can an introvert do basically to recharge themselves, at work?
Oh, this is a brilliant question. I spent a lot of time on this. You're hitting all the hot topics that I tend to speak about on a day-to-day basis or coach on. So with this one, and this is such an important piece with my introverts, I end, I think, almost every single session with saying, just take care of you. If you walk away from the session with nothing else, please make sure you are getting the rest that you need. You're doing whatever you can to fill your tank so that when you go into work, you have what you need to be able to deal with all the challenges or whatever it is that's coming up. So taking those breaks is going to be so important. And a lot of times, most of the people that I work with, don't have a lot of time. They're in back-to-back meetings. They're so busy going in and out of meetings or whatever it is that they're doing. There's just work is very, very demanding. And so I always tell my introverts, like, be very intentional. First of all, work-life balance is a big deal as well. And that looks different for everybody. So it's not going to be the same for everyone, but making sure that you have those clean cutoff points between work and, life outside of work so that you have that time to recharge. Incredibly important, especially for introverts, so that they're not burning themselves out. Because I was in that situation where I was very quickly, heading towards burnout because I wasn't taking care of that. I wasn't aware that I needed, that downtime. But even during the day, like doing things, even just simply breathing between, even if you have, 5 minutes, say, between meetings, you're going from one thing to another, taking your eyes away from the computer, mentally disconnecting from work for a minute and just looking out, like a long view, and just simply breathing and focusing on breath. Even little things like that can make such a big difference. Walking when you have a few minutes, just even walking away from your desk, going outside, stepping outside, coming back, in within those little pockets whatever little pockets that you can get, is going to be extremely helpful. And then being very, very mindful about where your energy is going. This is another thing I talk about a lot, is for introverts and extroverts, but be very mindful about where your time is going and what things are draining your energy and what activities and tasks, even people are giving you energy versus taking away, because you do want to be very mindful and intentional about where you put your time, your energy, your focus, and all of those different things. It's either going to fuel you for, what you have ahead of you, or it's going to take away.
Those employees that head to your office and they just
Yes.
suck all the oxygen out of the room.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. So it's like when you're dealing with a person like that, I was like, okay, so how do you manage that so that they don't suck the life out of you?
There's a couple of different things. One is boundaries. This is another big topic.
Yeah, boundaries.
So know yourself well enough to know that what's going to help you have the most effective conversation. So, sometimes we have to work with people that are different than us, right? And it's not always fun. Sometimes it's going to be endless. Oh my goodness, there've been so many people in my career and, who are just different from me, basically, right? There's no right or wrong. It's just like, okay,
Lee puts up with me. So there you go.
Yeah. We're both extroverts, so it's easy. But then again, it's like, so she's married to another extrovert. I'm married to an introvert. So yeah, I totally get your marital dynamic or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how Audrey's works with two extroverts.
No, I'm married to an introvert. But that's the thing. I want to know more about the spectrum, because my husband is very reticent to meet new people, and he's not very chatty, but he's a radio anchor in Chicago
and a professor and everything.
So he's almost like the dual.
He's kind of in the middle.
About at the top of the show.
Yes.
So if you're listening to this show, can you identify the different types? So maybe people listening might go, "Oh, I'm that," or "I might be that."
Yes. So there's a couple of things with that. And there is absolutely that spectrum, and everyone is different. That's why I'm very careful to say, like, I am going to generalize when it comes to introverts and extroverts, because not every introvert is going to show up in the way I might be describing, and same with extroverts. And there's that whole idea of an ambivert, right? Which is more of like that middle ground.
Yes.
And so the assessment that I normally use just to get some gauge on this is Myers Briggs, but there's also a free version of this. It's called 16personalities.com. So if you're not sure of which, where you fit on that spectrum, that's a free personality assessment you can go on there, take it, and then just see what you resonate with and what you don't. There might be things that, that comes out of that where you're like, oh, that's not really me. Or there might be things you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that this is part of me being maybe more on the introverted side or the extroverted side. So yeah, there's definitely going to be a variance in that. And even me, like over time, I've noticed myself, like in certain situations, But again, I feel for me personally, based on the journey that I've been on, I can connect that with purpose and meaning and my why. Whenever I'm in, because I gravitate towards, and I'm in a lot of, so for example, my journey is very much a faith journey. And so I'm very involved in a lot of things, different activities at church and things like that, different in different groups. And when people hear about like how many groups that I attend on a weekly basis, they're like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. But because for me, that's so connected with my why, and that just fills my spiritual tank, I'm very intentional and I choose to do those things. And everyone is different, right? So for me, I still do need that alone time to recharge. But there's certain activities, there's certain people who fill my tank and make me feel like, oh, this has been a great conversation, or this has been a great meeting, or whatever it is. And I'm okay to say yes to those things, knowing that I do need to prepare for that, whether it's mentally or with my energy or whatever it is, before and then after, being very mindful of, okay, I need that time now to rest and things like that. So that goes for my speaking engagements, meetings, all of those kinds of things. I just said, when you're aware of how you function and what works for you, and you align that with work and like your whether that's meetings or whatever it is that is purposeful and meaningful to you, it just makes it so much easier. But of course, there's going to be times, especially in a work environment, where you have to be in a meeting or you have to have a conversation with people that are not the most enjoyable, maybe, for you to be around, and it makes it a lot more challenging. So in those kinds of situations, I always encourage my introverts to, well, it works for both introverts or extroverts, but have a conversation, build a relationship with those people, and really go to talk about what's the best way for us to work together. So for example, if there's something that's bothering them, or if there's a conflict situation or whatever it is, and they're, coming into your office and they're like, okay, I need to talk about this. And they're constantly like, okay, using it as a kind of a sounding board, or wanting you to help solve the problem. Have a conversation about, okay, let's sit down and talk about what's the best way of us working together. The next time this happens, what do you need from me? And get to the underlying, like, what is it that they really truly need? And then figure out the best way to work together that works for both you and the other person, especially if it's a relationship that's ongoing. So you have this professional relationship and you're going to have to work with this person for an extended amount of time. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. And so you can set the stage for what's going to work on both sides, so that your day is not being constantly disrupted, but also the person knows that in order for you to be the most effective for them, to support them, there's just certain things that need to happen. So I always tell my introverts that the relationship part of it is so important, and having those open conversations ahead of time, whether that's on a team level, so talking with the team about, okay, as a team, we're going to have conflicts, we're going to have disagreements. Let's talk about it ahead of time. What's the best way for us as a team to align with whatever those team values are, what's important to us that we agree on, and then also talk about how are we going to address conflict and tense situations going forward. So if you have those discussions, it makes it so much easier, but also being mindful of your time as well. So when you have a meeting that you know is going to drain you, again, it goes back to just be mindful of, what am I doing before and after? Am I going to have the energy? Am I going to be able to really be focused and present? Or am I running from one meeting to another? And that's just going to completely deplete.
Oh, that's exhausting for everyone.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have a choice, right? We all have a choice. I know I have a lot of leaders who come to me and say, my calendar's full. And then we really deep dive into it and like, okay, let's take a look at it together. Let's figure it out. And I start asking some questions. They're like, oh, but actually I could, maybe this doesn't need to happen right here or there. So just be intentional about where you're spending your time, and just know that you have to make sure that you are taken care of, because otherwise you're not showing up as the best version of yourself. It doesn't help you and it doesn't help those around you.
So I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Is like over my shoulder, people might notice a logo called Team Trait, and that's a product that we have then for assessing not only individuals that are in the process of being hired or not, but also the team dynamic and what we call the team identity. And so we use a battery of 3 different assessments. One, we use DISC, we use a motivator assessment, and we also use the Hartman value profile. And we get very granular about this introvert extrovert thing. But what I do, to simplify it, I typically will use the analogy of the gym. So you have people then that will never go to the gym, and they'll run outside for fitness or whatever, or maybe they're just they're book readers or whatever, and that's it. You have gym rats on the other side of the spectrum who basically live at the gym, and then in the middle, whatever, you get a lot of people that's like, I don't want to go to the gym. I'm going to look for an excuse to not go to the gym and work out and like that. But once they get to the gym or whatever, they are totally into their workout and everything like that. So that's the simplify it. There's other things in between, obviously, as part of that analogy. But that's how I like to talk about it. But the last question I have for you is like, how do introverts perform under stress differently than extroverts? The stress of a deadline, the stress of I got a board meeting, I've got a difficult conversation with an employee that I really don't want to have, those types of things.
Yes. Oh, that's a brilliant question. So I'll go back to what I was saying earlier about some of those characteristics of introverts. Introverts tend to internally process. And that's not always a positive thing when we get into what I call the shadow side of that strength, right? So when you lean too much into that internal processing, you can go into that analysis by paralysis. So if there's something stressful coming up, you have, a difficult conversation, a challenge that you have to overcome, or whatever the case may be, a lot of times introverts can get a lot, get in their heads about it. And maybe overthink or overanalyze. So I always tell my introverts, make sure you have some kind of outlet, some way to kind of process through it. Maybe it's a conversation you have with, a coach, a mentor, somebody in your world that can help you to, untangle sometimes some of those things that go on, in our brains, so that we're not just internalizing everything and trying to figure out all on our own. Because we're all, we're created for community, right? There's other people around us that can help and support us. We just have to be intentional about that. And then when it comes to processing stress, it's the same thing. Like in that type of environment, a lot of times introverts are not going to vocalize when they're stressed or what they need, right? Because they are going through that stress reaction or response. So it's so important. I always tell my introverts, be proactive about this. Make sure that when you're going to go through a stressful period or work's going to require a lot of you or whatever it is, take care of yourself. That's another reason why I focus on this so much. Make sure you're taking care of yourself in terms of your mental health, your self-care, your nutrition, your sleep, doing fun activities. Fun is such an important part of it. Your social connections. Make sure that all of those other areas are taken care of so that you feel like when, you feel full so that, and prepared to go into your day or that stressful situation so that it helps you to stay more even-keeled. And you're not having that, that emotional reaction in the moment, but it helps you regulate your stress as well. But again, also, having that support and being able to talk through some of these things with somebody that you trust to help you prepare for some of those stressful situations. And even after the fact, if you can't anticipate, right? So you go through a stressful situation, you're like, oh my goodness, I did not see that coming. Just having that time to decompress and to work through some of those things that are going on, and know that you absolutely got it. You've got all the tools that you need. And I will speak from experience here. One of the things that held me back was the comparison trap. Right? It's very easy for us as introverts, or generally, to go through those experiences and be like, oh, I wish I could have done better at that, or I'm not as good as this person, or I didn't show up in the way that I maybe wanted to because I'm I don't think about things in the same way as somebody else. So be very mindful of not falling into that trap. Mindset is a huge part of this, right? What you allow to go into your mind and how you process in your belief system is going to absolutely impact your ability to handle and navigate stress and your ability to then recharge after the fact as well.
Well,
that's a whole other topic. There's so much we could talk about.
Beautiful website at leadershipmasteryalliance.com, and she's got an 8-week signature class for introvert leaders. And I love your website. And you've got a podcast as well. So I encourage everyone to visit. And I love when we have a guest that gives so many tangible tips. I mean, this has been fantastic. And I hope that we gave you good energy and didn't exhaust you.
Definitely not. I am so energized right now. Thank you both very much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.